I'm here this afternoon with Naivie Moses, a member of the WACs in World War II. We're here in the Baldwinsville Public Library, and we're going to discuss her life around that period and her World War II experience. Let's discuss your childhood a little bit. Where did you grow up? Describe your family a little bit.
Well, I lived briefly in Carthage, then we moved to Fulton, and then the Depression came, and my father bought a little farm up in Palermo, and I spent my teen years there. And my father worked in a factory, and my mother also worked in the woolen mill. And when school was out and the war came, and I worked 1 year in the chocolate works, and then the 1942 they formed the WACs. And of course I was anxious to help my country, so without telling anyone I went to Syracuse to take my exam, and I was an inch too short. I had to be 5 feet, and I also wore glasses, so they didn't issue 2 waivers. I had to improve one or the other. I came home, bought a bicycle, and I worked in the molding room in the chocolate works, and I exercised in the little boxes in there. And a year later, I told my father I was going to join the service, and he said I wouldn't join. He says they have a bad reputation. I said, that's just hearsay. I said, you have no proof. I said, it's what you make it. I said, besides, the factory you work in has a bad reputation. Chocolate Works has a bad reputation, and the seal rate, as far as I know. I said, that's what I've heard. So without saying anything, I went to Syracuse and took my exam, and I had stretched a ½ an inch, so they added a half. So I was able to get 1 waiver on my eyes. I had passed everything else. So I joined, and I came back, and a week later I got my notice. They didn't give me much time. And I got all dressed up, went to the chocolate works, and I said, well, I'm not coming back to work. So everybody said goodbye to me. They closed down the molding room and the other room, I can't remember what it was, where they freeze the chocolates. And everybody lined up and said goodbye to me. And after that, they'd keep my picture and whatever happened on the bulletin board. So I went to war.
Describe the WACs. What were their duties in the war?
Well, they started from clerk typists right up to truck drivers. I went to basic in Daytona Beach, and everybody, I had put down on my records that I had business course, but I didn't mention typing. And one night I had a dream. This was before I had my dream. Everybody was on a list to go somewhere. They were all stationed to go to others, except 5 of us. And I got teased because they said, you're probably going to baker and cook school. And I said, no, I'm not, because I hate cooking. And then this one evening, while I was sleeping, I dreamed that I was being sent to a typing school right there on the post. And the next morning, I said, before we have breakfast, before I eat, I said, they say the dream might come true. I'm going to tell you my dream. And I said, I dreamt that I was sent to a typing school here on the post. They said, but there isn't any school here on the post. Well, 3 or 4 days later, there was. It was posted on the bulletin board. There was one, and my name was on it. But because I had taken typing at school, I went right along and got ready to transfer, and I was sent to San Antonio, Texas, to Fort Sam Houston. And they were giving out PFCs to everybody who joined at first. But by the time I got there, they were frozen. So I had to earn mine. And I worked for the Engineer Corps. And when I got my PFC, it was in the camp paper. Everybody wondered why I was the only one in the camp paper with a PFC. Well, anyway, I enjoyed my work. And then they transferred our engineer officer to another camp, and they broke our group up. They laid off some of the civilians, but they transferred us, and I was transferred to quartermaster. And I worked at the warehouse office, which was a nice job. Then one day I got notice that I was being sent to a quartermaster school at Camp Lee, Virginia. Camp Lee, Virginia, I was sent, the class was about 6 weeks. Before we went, I was sent, it's a strange thing, but before we sent, I shouldn't even mention this because the Ouija board is, I would never think of using it now, but as young people, we played it a little. And San Antonio and I played it, and it said that we were all going overseas September 1944. Well, I was at Camp Lee, Virginia. By the way, an interesting thing happened. There was this girl in one of the classes there. She played buckwheat in our gang comedies when she was young, when she was a little girl. So after we got through there, I came back home, and my friends, half of my friends had left. September 1944, they went overseas. And I got a promotion in my job. I got up in the head office at first. When we graduated from quartermaster school, we were supposed to graduate as sergeants. I've got to let this know because everybody kids me about my PFC. The sergeants' ratings were frozen again. So none of us got them. We had to earn them again. I got back to the camp, and I got my into the big office, and the captain in charge of the quartermaster up there said, in a couple, 3 months, you'll start getting your promotion. But I got to thinking, I didn't want to stay there the rest of the war in San Antonio, Texas. So I called I told my commanding officer, the next time there's a group going, I'd like to go. She says, but you just come home. I said, I know, but I'd rather, if I had my choice, rather than a raise, I'd rather go overseas. She called a week or two later, and she said, do you really want to go? First she called the captain I worked for, and he said, I can't, she's not going. He said, I just got her back. So she called me back, which was kind of unusual because they didn't usually do that. You went when you had to go. And she said to him, she said, do you really want to go? And I said, yes, I do. So she called him back. She said, 8th Service Command said she goes. So I was only there about 2 weeks, lost out again on my ratings, and I headed for Camp Shanks. And that was interesting. When we went on the ship, we were the only girls on the ship. There weren't any soldiers going over at the time because they needed some empty ships to send over to bring back the wounded. And on the ship, there was just the crew. So they hired, they didn't hire us, but they asked us, we had to take turns in guarding our quarters. So the girls had to, every 2 hours, they had to have a different shift. Well, I didn't like getting up in the night, so I had my choice of doing that or working on the newspaper that they put on the ship. And I called my column, We the WAC. And I interviewed the foreign WACs, the girls who were from there originally, from Europe, and most of them were joined just to go back to find their families. And it was called, the paper was called The Crow's Nest. That was interesting. And then we got to France. And we stayed two weeks in Compiègne Forest, waiting to go on up. The Germans were still in Vienna. That's where we were heading. And then we stayed 2 weeks in Verona, Italy. And to take our showers, we lived in tents in the forest, and it was the forest where the engineers had built us out in about 5 miles away on a dirt road, and in some field they built a facility for showers. We had 5 minutes to run in that shower, take a shower, and run out, and then we drove back on the dusty road. But at least it was nice.
What were some of your duties over in Europe?
Well, I didn't have a duty till I got to Vienna. We got to Vienna, and General Mark Clark couldn't decide whether he wanted to settle in Vienna or Salisbury. So in the meantime, we got temporary jobs. I was assigned to the quartermaster, to the administrative office. But I temporarily worked for the CIA in that office till he was ready to settle. And that was short. I couldn't, the captain I worked for wanted me to join him because I was in charge of the Nazi books. You know, the Nazis that were not found, that were still gone, lost. And so by that time we went to our regular offices and I got into the quartermaster. And we did clerical work. We had a Viennese lady working on the computers. She was the fastest typist that I had ever heard of or had ever seen. She called me Miss Susie. She's a sweet lady. I used to give her soap and stuff like that because they were scarce there for them. And the quartermaster consisted of different offices, like clothing, food, and our office took care of those. Whenever mail come in, we sorted them out, we took care of them, we went around, picked them up, everything. And it was very interesting. I had a chance to be supply sergeant. In Italy I was interviewed, but I refused it. Then I was sorry later, but it was too late. I refused it because I wanted a day job. Knew when I was come home, in an office. Supply sergeant, you didn't know whenever troops come in, you had to be there. And some of the girls drove trucks, drove jeeps. Most of them worked in offices over there. And I did get to Switzerland for a week, but we went in groups, and we stayed in hostels for women, and then the men stayed wherever the men stayed. And you'd hear shooting once in a while on the train going down, and they'd say they were some of the Russian soldiers trying to get away, that their own people were shooting them because they were trying to come into Austria, whatever.
How long were you in Europe for?
A little over almost 2 years and a half. No, I wasn't in Europe. No, I was in Europe 8 months, but I was in the service 2 years and a half.
When were you discharged?
In April 46.
What did you do after your discharge? And how old were you at that time?
I was 25, and I decided I'd better come home and start settling down. I did have a chance to go back as a civilian and work in the same office with more money. And but at 25, you feel like settling down. So I thought, well, they said I could come home and go back. And we went on, what do they call them? Those, what were they called? Marks or points. We got out on points, and my points were ready. So, but I decided not to go back. I decided to come home, and my father wanted to open up a grocery store up in Carthage. And he wanted me, I told him I'd give him 1 year of my life and my time. And I enjoyed it. Let's see, what else?
I know you brought some pictures along with you and some newspaper articles to share with us here in this interview. So,
our group was more for public relations when we were going overseas, and this picture here was supposed to show them how we looked. We never dressed like that, but that's the way that was to be, as to show them how the girls who did the job would look. And here they are preparing for practicing abandoning ship. But the day they abandoned learned how to do that, I was inside in the city getting my glasses, new glasses. And here's how we dressed, getting ready to march overseas. We were at Shanks. And this here is, we're getting ready to leave for Europe. This is me in the middle. And there was one can I,
go ahead.
me to, shall I mention, I'd like to mention that I had 2 or 3 brothers who were in the service. Ferris Elhage, E-L-H-A-G-E, my maiden name. And, well, Hyder wasn't in World War II. He was in the Korean. And Naif, Alhage, N-A-I-V-E. And my husband was in the Air Force. His brother George was in the Navy. Ned was in the Army. And my brother-in-law Lyle Rumble was also in the Air Force. So I didn't go off to war alone. I used to go up there and spend my summers there.
So why don't we talk a little bit about your experiences after the war? Both with, I know you spent a year with your father working in the store.
In
and then,
Carthage, yes.
When were you married, and what did you do?
I was married in 1948 in December, and I've known my husband all my life, and we corresponded during the war years. He came home before I did. He was stationed in England. Finished his missions and came home. And then maybe that's one of the reasons I didn't go back as a civilian. So I came home and helped my father with the grocery store, and 2 years later we got married and opened our own grocery store. And we finally settled in Baldwinsville after searching for over a year. And we're happy that we did make that choice.
Have you lived here ever since?
We've lived here ever since. And that was in well, we didn't really live here till 1952. We built the grocery store down on Smoky Hollow, my husband and I, and we had a little boy, 3 months old, Albert. And the doctor said to Joe, when you get your water and your heat and everything in, then she can move in. And we lived in the store for about 5 years. Then his brothers came up from Ferrisville and joined us.
Good.
Lived happily ever after.
Good. Well, thank you very much. The WACs were lucky to have you as part of their forces. And I appreciate you coming in and interviewing with us today.
Thank you. I didn't tell you, but we had reunions. We had 3 reunions in San Antonio. You don't have to put that in, but they found the girls. They had can you imagine finding all those women in those 2 years there? They found them, some of the men that worked in the post office helped them at the camp. So they finally, after so many years, starting somewhere in the 80s, they had reunions in San Antonio.
Talk about a little bit about your family since the war.
Well, I had Albert, and happy childhood with him. Then we had Jody, 5 years later after I got out of the store and his brothers came in, and happy childhood with her. And now we have 2 lovely little grandchildren, Albert's children, little boy and girl. And we enjoy them very much. See them almost every month. He lives in Pennsylvania. And Jody lives here, nearby us.
Have you seen any of the girls from the WACs since you got out?
In the 80s, they finally located all of the group that were stationed at Fort Sam Houston, and they've had about 4 reunions, and I've attended 2. Every 3 years they were having a reunion, and they put up a great big marker at Fort Sam Houston for the WACs. All the barracks are gone, and the sergeant's club and all those are gone. But it was nice to see most of them. A lot of them have died since. I'm 74, and I'm one of the youngest, younger ones, and they're planning another reunion in another year.
Well, I hope that you get to see them all again.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming in today.
You're welcome. Was that all right?
That was great. It was perfect.